Hello, my name is Elizabeth Bazan. I am an educator here at the Illinois State Museum, and we thank you for joining us tonight for an artist chat with Nora Moore Lloyd. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Doug Stapleton, who is our curator of art and will be leading tonight's program.
Thank you. I'm going to just get this going. Hi, so I am Doug Stapleton. I'm the curator of art here with the Illinois State Museum, and thank you all for attending this artist talk. This is in conjunction with an exhibition that's up right now in our Springfield Museum, which will be up till the end of this month of January, called Human Nature. And Human Nature is an exhibition, and I just want to make sure, am I on full screen there for the PowerPoint? No, I'm not?
Yes, you are, Doug. You're good.
Oh, I am? Okay, good, great. I want to make sure. My technical capacities are a little, but Human Nature is a group exhibition which includes several artists, Barbara Curie and Lindsay Lockman, Hector Duarte, Laura Fosberg, Jin Lee, Nora Lloyd, who we're speaking to tonight, and Andrew Young. And this exhibition briefly is all the artists in the exhibition look at that relationship we have with the natural world as a source of our sustenance. And their work asks about how we see that relationship. Do we, by conventional thinking, think about the natural world as an endless resource that's only for our benefit? Or do we think about something more nuanced, about us being in a reciprocal relationship with the natural world? And what does that or doesn't that look like? And my prompt for this exhibition was that a little bit of writing there on the right about the current thinking about ecology, and this idea about relationship, being in right relationship with the natural world, and understanding it as the sort of the work of our lifetime about what we give and what we take. And tonight we're going to talk to Nora Moore Lloyd, who her component for this exhibition is a piece that's called Birch Bark Wigwass, The Beauty and History of Birch. And this is an installation shot down in Springfield, and the artist here from the reception. And this is a visual story about relationship of people to their homeland and the knowledge and respect for that land that offers back sustenance. It's also the story of Indigenous peoples' removal from and their enduring presence in the Midwest, as told by Nora through photographs, documents, letters, family history. For Lloyd, what sort of started this, and we'll talk about this in more depth, is a postcard of Birch Grove in Rogers Park neighborhood of Chicago. And this was, which showed harvesting marks from harvesting bark by Indigenous gatherers. And this was the spark for this project. And as she'll talk about, this is a postcard from the early part of the 19th century. So it is a story that is in living memory. It's a story that is a reminder of who is unacknowledged from the history of present day, modern day immigrant-built Chicago. Lloyd braids all these together, these stories of relationship with our ancestors, this land, their knowledge of the resources available, with the present day concerns of Indigenous people in the Great Lakes region, which is all a very heady way of saying that this is a very rich and magnificent body of work, which first was presented at the Rogers Park Historical Society, West Ridge Rogers Park Historical Society. So a little bit about Nora, and she'll give some more of an introduction herself, but this is the sort of facts of it all. Nora creates artwork that focuses on Indigenous peoples, on cultures, on nature, and on documentation of community and family history using traditional storytelling and photography. And her work has been exhibited at the American Indian Center in Chicago, Cahokia Mounds Museum, Chicago History Museum, the Comanche National Museum, the Field Museum of Natural History, the Museum of Ethnography and Folklore in Bolivia, and also the National Museum of Archaeology and Ethnography in Guatemala, as well as the Illinois State Museum. And with that, I wanted to say welcome, Nora, and I wanted to also have you just fill out a little bit more about yourself here. Give us a little bit more introduction for yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. And thank everyone for coming. I'm delighted to be here and to be part of this Human Nature show is pretty exciting. So I thank you, Doug, for curating this show, and Cinnamon and everyone at the museum. My background, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago on the north side. And when I was thinking today about an introduction, I was going to say, and I had a pretty normal childhood, but boy, I mean, normal now, that whole world or word doesn't fit. I mean, I had a traditional, non-complicated childhood, unlike all the kids today. But what I did growing up in the suburbs, my parents chose this suburb because of the educational system. I went to good schools, but I didn't hear much about Native culture, which until, so half my life, as you know, Doug, I didn't know I was Native, and we'll talk about that more later. But it just seemed amazing to me when I did find out that here I am in the suburbs, and then the oldest urban Indian center, the American Indian Center, was 15 miles away, and no teacher ever mentioned that. I mean, not one person I grew up with knew that we had this vibrant Indian community in this city. But we'll talk more about that. But basically my career was in advertising. And then my late husband and I had a graphic design firm. And a lot of what I did was videotape people getting new hips and knees, joint replacement, which was a very odd niche, of course. Not everyone did it back then. And then that evolved into photography and doing my own photography.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Which move to this next slide as well too, and to sort of talk about your work in the Human Nature show about birch bark wigwas, and to talk about that installation and how that project started. If you want to, and we'll have some slides that kind of bring us through that discussion as well. So.
Well, for sure. There's this wonderful small gallery in Rogers Park, in the Rogers Park neighborhood, Roman Susan Foundation. And I saw a call for to artists for a show called Property. And property, for one thing, in Indigenous culture, including Ojibwe, there isn't a word for owning property, because traditionally, I mean, on the reservation, that land was everyone's. I mean, you didn't own a little plot of land. So what Nathan Smith at Roman Susan had picked, I think, 100 photos from the archives of the Rogers Park Westridge Historical Society, including this one. Mm-hmm. And I was going through all these photos, and this is from 1909, a stand of birch trees that shows the marks of where the people who lived here before it was Rogers Park, where they harvested bark. And the funny story that, so I chose that. The concept was to pick an old photo and then match it with either new work or an existing work. And I have a 100-year-old log cabin up on the reservation in Wisconsin, that on my road, there are 3 stands of birch trees that every spring I photograph, because I love seeing where people have harvested for centuries the bark. So I have lots of photos that look kind of like these. And then the funny, when I called Nathan at the gallery and told him that I had chosen this photo, he said something like, wow, or I said, why do you think the trees look like that? And Nathan said something like, was there some kind of Dutch elm disease for birch tree or something wrong? And I said, no, that shows where bark was harvested. So that was the beginning. Ask a question. I'm going to cough.
Great, sure. Well, I think it's going to show up later on in the slideshow. Like this was then made into a double-sided flag where you had this image superimposed over one of your contemporary photographs, and then the reverse side of the flag was its opposite, which is just such a sort of the centerpiece of the exhibition. And to also, you're talking about these photographs. And this is also one that you included in the exhibition as well too, which talks to that same idea about like what we do and don't know about the history of Indigenous occupation in Chicago and how it's been erased, or how it becomes something else from our sort of immigrant Western settler perspective, how we see this community or see this population as something outside of the land.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, exactly. And what struck me, and this is from 1909, which I'm granted we're now in the 21st century, but that isn't so long ago. I mean, 1909, and though the shot showing the trees, I thought, wow, the people who live now in Rogers Park had no idea that it was not so long ago that these people were there. I mean, that's what struck me, and I considered, because I have a lot of photos of powwows, and what people, some elder friends of mine up on the Ho-Chunk reservation, when they were growing up at train stations, they would, when a train would come through with city people, they would dance for money. I mean, to raise money. And again, and this is maybe 80 years ago. I mean, some of my elders in the photos you'll see did that. So it again was just saying to me how when I grew up thinking that American Indians were way in the past, it just is not true.
Right.
Plus, that's a great photo.
Yeah, that is a great photo. Yeah. And this was, as we were talking, I should have put this out of order. This was the piece that you created, the front side and the back side, with this sort of collapsing of time of the past and the present, and through this use of photographs, which I just think was a really, really brilliant part of the exhibition.
Well, and that was Nathan's idea, doing the flag that way.
Because this was on a flagpole. This was part of that project, so it was not just in Strawberry Gallery. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
And also with your installation with birch bark wigwas, you talk quite a bit about birch bark and its use, and this is a big component of the exhibition. And so let's talk about it. Talk to us about that. About what is the significance of this material and of birch bark, and some of the slides we're showing are things that are in the exhibition and part of the texts that are included. So, but without reading this, tell us about it.
Well, it's pretty amazing how important birch bark is to Ojibwe people, because as you see there, it was used for really important everyday things, from sacred thing. What I've seen photos of old birch bark where they painted before language was written. They would pass down special sacred songs and the way to conduct ceremonies in pictures that they would paint. I mean, almost like pictographs that they would paint onto the birch bark and then roll. And I mean, that they started doing hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but from sacred things, and as you see, burials, to everyday, to cooking items. And also it was done for, it was used for art. And I have not tried to do it myself, but there's bark biting, that you get the bark wet and then you use your eye teeth, I guess, and bite really, really hard in patterns. And I couldn't find an image of that, but you get the bark wet, you fold it, and then you bite it, kind of like when you make those snowflakes out of cut paper. But the precision that people knew how to do, obviously they couldn't see what they were doing, and then they unfolded to these magnificent geometric designs. So it, as you can see on this slide, it was done for creative beauty as well as household objects, and of course canoes.
Right. From this image that you provided also, which is in the exhibition from the postcard.
Yeah. And that's from my reservation, Le Coudray, in I think it was early 1900s. But the canoes had to be really strong, which again proves how the strength of, or the durability of birch bark. Because when they would go ricing, when they would harvest wild rice, they would hope to get pounds and pounds worth into the canoe. But, and that's wild rice back there in the background.
Right, and this is not in the exhibit, but we were looking at this image, when we were selecting images too, about just the range of use. And we were also talking, which I want to move us to the next slide as well too, because you brought my attention to this as well too, this recent project with the Northwestern University that Wayne Valliere, is that correct? Or
yes,
Valliere,
I think.
Valliere was the artist in residence at Northwestern, and included this link down here. We could probably maybe get that into the chat later on as well too, to get to this video. Tell us, and it's not a part of the exhibition, but it just actually really relates very well to what we were showing, these historic and some historic and contemporary objects, but it's good historic photographs. But here is, it's the living tradition for this project. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, or?
Yeah, I only know a little actually, but Northwestern University has become this huge supporter of Indigenous culture and has its own department, and they decided to bring down this elder from Lac Flambeau, because he's one of not very many people who know how to make properly and traditionally make a birch bark canoe. And so he was here for months making the canoe and teaching the young people, because there are several students, Native students at Northwestern. So it was him passing on knowledge in the old traditional way. But I missed the launch. They did it in November, and they postponed it at once because of bad weather. And then when they did launch it, it was still pretty windy and wavy. So they went out into the water, but I don't think they stayed very long. And
Right.
it's going to be on display in the spring, I think. And then I don't know what's going to happen after that. I assume they will take it out again.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty wonderful to show the community, and mostly the youth in the community, and then also non-native people, how the people who lived on this land not so long ago, how they survived.
Right, and use this resource, and in the exhibition, your component just talking about this range of and sort of wealth of the resource that Birch, its uses on all levels, which I think is just a very powerful statement about relationship to a resource, a natural resource, to something within the world around us, and having that understanding and respect for that material as well too, which is what many of the artists do or address also in the exhibition with human nature. There's an additional part, layer to this installation as well too, which is sort of what I moved to as well, is that you're weaving together these family histories along with the histories of treaties and reservations within the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region, and that containment and removal of indigenous peoples within this region. And you do this by grounding your work in the lives of the generations of your family. So can you tell us about these voices that we see and that we meet in the exhibition, and especially like your great great uncle Frank Blue Sky and your grandmother Anna Barber? So you want to talk a little bit about that family history and its relationship to the installation?
Of course.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, my whole childhood, I didn't know that I was Native. And the reason for that, my grandmother, Anna, who was born at Le Coudray Reservation, where my old log cabin is, she was born in 1880. And back then, Native kids were made to go to either a government school, to go to schools, and they were either mission schools or government schools. And Anna, it turns, Anna had lost her father when she was 1 year old, and lost her mother. Her mother was Gweki Gabuikwe, who died when Anna was 2. So Anna was being raised by her grandparents and big extended family, lots of aunts and uncles and cousins. So the school that she was sent to, which was maybe 5 miles from where she was living, which, by the way, is on the road where my cabin is, which is an unusual situation. But she would go to the Presbyterian school, and what the mission, the Presbyterian mission, what they didn't realize is that the kids in the summer would go out and help harvest wild rice. In the spring, they would go to the maple to gather maple syrup, and then they would help hunt. They didn't go to school, of course. They lived their lives. So the two women running the school got told by the head of Presbyterian Church, saying, your attendance is down and we're going to shut you down. So when that happened, they decided, for whatever reason, to take Anna, essentially kidnap my grandmother. And they took her, by the way, to Indiana. So she was taken from the beautiful Northwoods in Wisconsin to Warsaw, Indiana. Yeah, and kidnapped. So they raised her and gave her an education, but they made her clearly ashamed of her heritage. So Anna, whom I knew, I was 21 when she passed, so I knew her well. And she never told her children or anyone except her husband that she was Native. And that's why I didn't know. Mm-hmm. So when I discovered I love this, her grandfather, Oshawashkogi Jig, who was Chief Blue Sky, is the one sitting on the ground like that on the right. And so he and his wife were raising Anna when she was taken. And that because she was the chief's granddaughter, that had to be awfully devastating certainly to the family and perhaps the tribe. But what his son, Anna's uncle, because somehow Anna's uncle, Frank Blue Sky, found out where she was. So he wrote her letters from 1892 to 1900, trying to keep the line of communication open with her. But the point I want to make, Frank Blue Sky didn't speak English. And the reservation is about 10 miles from the town of Hayward. So he had to, at great effort, go into the town of Hayward to a translator. And what he did was say what he wanted to tell Anna. And the translator wrote it down. Frank Blue Sky copied it. So my cousin found these 6 handwritten letters just saying, hey, don't forget us. And this is what's happening at home, which was extraordinary.
So before we get to the next slide, and these letters are in the exhibition, sort of facsimile copies of them, and the text, and we'll talk about what you did with this as well too. But this idea of this erasure as well too, this removal, this erasure, cultural erasure, whether it's the Indian school, but like this photograph of the chief's delegation as well too, is part of that history that is, well, it's a history that is not told, and there's also a really horrible history of just the forced removal and sort of closure and moving in stricture on Indigenous people on their lands. So while the photographs have a certain staid and sort of very, quality to them, they're loaded with a very powerful and very difficult history.
Well, and this photo is from 1880. They're all Ojibwe chiefs who went to Washington in 1880 to protest, I'm pretty sure, the upcoming Allotment Act, which was 1887. And the Dawes Allotment Act, what it did was break up the reservations into 80-acre plots, which again went against ownership. And because it said, like here in Chicago, we have our plots of land, but that wasn't the case on reservations. And that's also how so much, I think 2/3, or I can't quote, I'm not sure what the exact figure is, but much native reservation land was lost after the allotment because people, non-tribal people would go up to a native person and offer them $50 for their deed to that property. And because the concept of land ownership didn't exist, most, or back then, the native people thought, I mean, how stupid are these guys? $50 for a piece of paper. And they signed away their land with thumbprints usually. So that's why even on my reservation, on my road, because the road runs between two lakes, my neighbor, most of my neighbors are non-tribal because the land was sold, 80 years ago.
Well, I want to move to this next slide, and I would probably, the sound will start right, I think, as soon as we move into it. So a little bit of the setup, the letters that you talked about that that Frank Blue Sky wrote to your grandmother, Anna, you had them translated into Ojibwe. And we're going to move to that slide. It has a translation and the sound file. Let's see if this, and hopefully this will all work. If I can get this to move, thank you. And there we go. I'll start the sound here in a second.
Letter 3. Glover, Sawyer County, Wisconsin. Ishwaso go nagazedo de Menegizes, 1894. Nishimis, Ojibiaganak, Minoa Ojibiaganabu, and Abujatunan, the Manajimo Tunan. Nimishesh, Louis, Yeshquayashigini, Jwaso de Bayaganik, Bijinago, Gionago Shig. Nabashkade, Mendaso de Bayagas, Baymaseg. Nimbwana Watun, the Minobia Gayan, Wayne the Zingingwe Sayan, Mishka Kiddo de Boanabud, Niwabish Kiningui Ganabudge, Nijawayna Megmanidu, Yijashe, Frank Blue Sky.
So what
Letter 3, Glover.
Oops, there we go.
Oops.
No, sorry.
Well, you know what?
Just gonna go back to this for a second. Yeah. So what was and you're thinking with this idea with this translation? Talk a little bit about that process and yeah.
Well, for sure. And first, though, I just want to read this in English. I know you can see it on the screen, but the fact that that Frank Blue Sky didn't speak English, his choice of words here is poetic in English, I think. Mm-hmm. And the letter he had sent 2 months before this, he had mentioned that his brother was sick. So now this letter saying, "My dear niece, I take the pen and ink to write to you with sad news. Poor Louis, my younger brother, he is dead, 7:30 yesterday evening. Most my tears burst every minute, and I could not write very well, my eyes so leak. And he say before he died, I got pure white wings, I think. God bless me. And what the reason I chose, it almost makes me cry every time. The reason I chose this letter, those splotches, are teardrops.
Mhm.
I mean, because he was using a fountain or a whatever kind, I mean, a pen and ink.
Mhm.
So here I'm looking at my great uncles or one great uncle's teardrops. I'm pretty,
Mhm.
but the reason after my cousin sent these to me, I really wanted to hear what it would sound like in Ojibwe, to hear how he said it. And Dr. Michael Sullivan, who is a professor at the Ojibwe Immersion School on the reservation, was recommended to me. So I asked him to translate. So he did the writing, and then I asked to record him. And he had his PhD is in the old traditional Ojibwe. So for his thesis, he went to all the Ojibwe reservations and interviewed the elders to hear how language, Ojibwe language, used to be spoken, because it, like English, it evolves. But so this is what you heard is what Frank Blue Sky must have sounded like, which is pretty wonderful, I think.
Well, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like this very poetic way of giving voice back, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. And I'm going to move forward because we have other things too here. And this was not a very good image, I'm afraid, because I took it from, through the frame, and there's glaze, there's reflections, but there's, again, you're bringing bringing the story to the present day, including photographs of yourself with photographs of is that your grandmother there in the lower left?
It is. My Aunt Anna is on the left and I'm on the right, but I began with that photo of Anna holding me I'm 10 weeks old there.
Oh, right, in the middle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And here, I remember her, the way she looked down at the bottom left. She often wore a dark coat and was just, I thought, was the shyest person I had ever met, because she never initiated conversation. And what I have figured out is that because of how the missionary ladies raised her, she was feeling ashamed. And but the happy part of the story, her husband knew she was Native, and they were happy. So I'm glad to be giving her a voice that she didn't have.
And I wanted to also talk, now we're sort of jumping around here and some different things about some of your earlier work, which led up to this and just is part of your ongoing concern artistically and and this is from a project of documenting elders. And we've got several slides that I'll go through as you're talking. Talk a little bit about this body of work and what you've done in the past.
Sure.
Thank you.
I had only done 2 years of college, my freshman year here in the States, sophomore in France. And then after discovering my heritage, I found Native American Educational Services, which was the only Native run and Native owned fully accredited for a bachelor's degree college in the country. And although it was a bachelor's degree, it was really master level work. And for my thesis, I photographed the elders who founded Chicago's community. And I did, because really what is most important to me is the story. I mean, it was then and continues to be now. I don't stage things. I just sort of shoot opportunistically. But I mean, you can see and actually the one on the right here is Sarah Begay. She was Navajo, not from Chicago, but I liked her. She was a dear friend.
Yeah. And I also wanted to talk about now, and these are some images that you've taken, and we've included those in the exhibition as well too. But since we've been talking about and working on this exhibition, your component in the exhibition, you were talking about your most recent work with animal rescue. So we're going to shift gears again and talk about this next, because this has been, I think, our conversations when we were just talking about like, hey, I need label copy, or let's use this image. The conversation then talks about, well, what's the latest rescue, or what's the latest adventure, and how does this? I mean, and this is in some ways a part and parcel of who you are and your artistic work. I think this. Both these photographs and also these current photographs that you're taking. So talk about this work now. I mean, this is a work that you're doing. It's part of your relationship with the natural world. And yeah,
exactly right. Yeah, for more than 3 years. I have volunteered with Chicago Bird Coalition Monitors, which is a wonderful organization that when we hear about, or when someone calls the hotline about an injured bird and occasionally other animals, then one of the volunteers will go out and rescue the bird, and then we take it to a wildlife rehab place. And I didn't even know that people did this until I saw on public TV the director was interviewed, and Chicago is one of the worst places in the country for bird deaths by flying into high-rise glass, because we're right on a migration route. And so these birds, I should say, or these images are birds clearly that didn't survive. Most of our rescues do, but not all. Some of them are so seriously injured. And I wanted to capture in a dignified way their beauty in silence. Because many of them are these migrating birds who go 1,000 or 2,000 miles and then hit a window, but also seagulls and thrushes. And I have become kind of the raptor person. So I do a lot of rescues of owls and hawks, and I rescued one bald eagle. I drove 100 miles to rescue that one. But I just think it's important that people know there are ways to reduce these injuries. So I'm putting together a collection. I'm documenting again the bird stories, and they deserve to be recognized. But I thought we should also show success. And this is our director, Annette, with a kestrel falcon that I rescued that was caught in a storefront. And the goal, of course, after the rehab center treats them, is to release them back in nature. So I have been privileged to go on many of the releases, which is extraordinarily thrilling, really, to see a big red-tailed hawk that has spent the night with me before I got it out to rehab. To see it fly back into nature is pretty wonderful. I mean, who would have thought? And that's an American bittern that also, I should say, when I do a rescue and it's too late to get the bird to rehab, then I overnight them here. I mean, in this room, where in a carrier, not usually out like that. And I cover it so they're quiet. My cats ignore them, and then I drive it to rehab the next day. And that bittern had a bad wing, and they fixed it, and it was released. Pretty amazing beak on that.
It is. And it's also amazing. I mean, they're wonderful stories when we've been talking as well, too. And when you suggested that we just show some of the images, I was really glad to do that, to kind of bring also what your concerns are, into the present, right, the present moment as well, too. This quote is on from part of your writing with the exhibition with Birch bark wigwams, and is on the wall in the gallery space. And so these bodies of work, in terms of your photograph with the elders, with Birch bark wigwams, with the bird rescue, and the photography, is as you're talking about this, it's like what we leave in the world. And in our present world, and one of the questions of Human Nature exhibit is, as we confront these drastic changes in our landscape brought about by us, whether it's the sprawling built urban environment, or invasive species, resource depletion, climate change, but also the historic and past changes and harm that have been done to for the indigenous people who lived on this land, and what reparations are not being made to address that inequity, but also how indigenous voices are speaking out on behalf of indigenous knowledge and resources and information and knowledge about how we can live and work and use resources in the land in good relationship. So this is a big question about, how do you see that, how do you see the role of traditional indigenous knowledge, and what does it offer to help us understand a relationship to and responsibility to the environment?
Well, indigenous people always have only taken what they need. I mean, that's the way, the culture, as opposed to the non-native culture of stockpiling and producing and producing and producing. So I think what needs to be done is just getting the word out, really, because that isn't talked about. If in like Northwestern and UIC has a Native program, if people would learn about that way of thinking, which is whatever you do in this world or whatever you harvest or use, you are supposed to keep in mind how that will affect 7 generations ahead, not just how it's going to affect you. It's the communal living mentality that used to exist and still does, of course, with Native communities. But it's just, I think, a matter of teaching people, having it available, because it makes sense. It has made sense for centuries. I mean, nothing was being depleted. Our forests were doing all right, and there weren't, well, I don't know actually if there were huge fires like we have now. I think California and maybe Washington is now talking to some West Coast tribes on the old way of managing forests to avoid all this terrible forest fire. But it just seems we need to teach.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now, and in the time remaining to find out, Elizabeth, if we have questions. Just also to say that the Human Nature exhibit is up for a little bit longer in Springfield, but in March, April, it is going to move to our Lockport Gallery, which will be up through the spring and the summer. So those on the northern reaches of the state will hopefully sign up and get on our mailing list and find out about when that exhibition will come to Lockport. So thank you, Nora. And Elizabeth, I'm here in these last seconds ticking away. Is there anything that you want to?
We do have a few minutes for questions. So if anyone has, we haven't had any posts that I've seen. So if you do have a question, please do drop it in the chat or in the Q&A. But we do have about 6 minutes to take those if anyone has any.
We cannot have answered everything.
Well, I think you did a great job, Nora. Thank you so much for taking the time just to talk more about this. And I hope that's it'll spur also people to come see the exhibition as well too. And also, where can we find out more about your work, Nora, your website?
Well, my website is www.nativepics.org. And then also check out Chicago Bird Collision Monitors to see what we do. It's exciting work, and we always need more attention on that front too.
We do have a question, Nora, from Lynn. She was wondering if you see your work as an artist as doing or contributing to some of the work of education about Native perspectives that you were just alluding to at the end of the conversation, and if so, how?
I absolutely do. I have, before COVID, I would regularly give talks, presentations to either third graders, because where I grew up, third grade was kind of it when they covered Native stuff. And so I have made a point of going to my school, and I said, by the way, did you know that there is a Native student here. But then I also have presented to Northwestern students and junior high students. I try to just talk about it, and people like me, because I half my life I didn't know, people are generally fascinated. So I like sharing the information.
Great. Brooke asked if there is a traditional way that harvesters decide which stands of birch to harvest, and do they rotate those stands?
I don't think so, because I see the stands on my street. Maybe it's every other year. I mean, now that I think about it, maybe the same trees at one end are done one year, and then they all the next year they do a different. But traditionally families always went to the same stands. And I see on one road, you'll see, because birch trees usually aren't long-lived, but you'll see old ones with the harvest way up at the top. And they know exactly how deep to go, which I don't know.
And there's in the exhibition, there's a historic video of harvesting as well. And you included a report, which is in the exhibit on the resources table. That was a really lengthy report that was put out by like Fish and Wildlife, like the federal government,
Yes.
that looked at the upper Midwest and the sort of natural history and the ecology of birch, but also talked quite a bit about Indigenous perspective and knowledge and relationship to birch, which also I thought was a fairly extraordinary point of view for a federal report, government report. So if you come to the exhibition, you can read that report.
Yes. Or find it online.
I'll find online as well.
Imagine too, but better to go to the exhibit.
Well, thank you both for this great conversation. There are lots of thanks in the chat as well to both of you. We really appreciate your time, Nora, here sharing with us, especially your story and how it has affected your work. Just wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that part of you with us. And thank you, Doug, for helping tonight and organizing this conversation. I think it's been great. The exhibit is wonderful. Do come out. It's up through, I believe, the end of the month. Is that right, Doug? Or is it the end of
Yes.
Of February? So do come out to if you're here in Springfield. Otherwise, look for it in Lockport. It will be coming up there soon. So thank you again to Doug and to Nora and to all of you for being with us this evening. We're so glad you were able to make it out, and we hope to see you at another program here soon.
Thank you. Thank you. What a pleasure. Yeah, it was great.
Great. Have a good night, everyone, and stay safe.
Yes, Mary.